The Celestin died screaming. That was how Veluxy navigator Keth would remember it later, if he survived long enough to remember anything at all. The ship's reactor had failed without warning, and the vessel had torn itself apart as it fell through the atmosphere of a planet that should never have been approached in the first. PLACEKX 447. The Galactic Union had marked it as a survey target. Nothing more. A world of extremes, hostile to all known life, interesting only to scientists who studied such things from the safety of orbit. No one was supposed to land here. No one was supposed to walk on its surface. Now 42 crew members had crashed into its red soil, and most of them were already dead. Keth pulled himself from the wreckage on shaking legs. His species, the Veluxy, were not built for trauma. Their bodies were elegant, efficient, and deeply fragile. He could already feel his internal temperature dropping as the planet's sun began to set. Without climate control, he would not survive 2 of this world's day-night cycles. The math was simple and cruel. Around him, other survivors emerged from the broken hull of the Celestin. He counted them with growing despair. 9 out of 42. Only 9 had lived. There was Ambassador Torvax of the Kreth Confederacy, a tall and thin figure whose species required precise atmospheric conditions to breathe. Chief Botanist Yeel of the Stiani, whose people needed to eat every 6 hours or their metabolism would shut down permanently. There were others too, each carrying their own biological death sentence. And then there were the 2 humans. Keth had worked with humans before. The Galactic Union had welcomed their species into its ranks 30 years ago, and they had spread quickly through the stars. They were not impressive to look at. They had no natural weapons, no protective shells, no special senses. They were soft, slow, and seemed to require an absurd amount of sleep. But something about them had always made Keth uneasy. The female human, Dr. Miriam Cole, was already moving through the wreckage with purpose. She was the ship's xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life. Blood ran down the side of her face from a cut on her forehead, but she did not seem to notice. She was pulling supply crates from the debris, checking their contents, making neat piles of things that might be useful. The male human, Engineer Dax Reyes, was doing something even stranger. He was laughing. "Dax," Miriam said, without looking up from her work. "Focus." "I am focused," Dax replied. He was a large man with brown skin and a wide smile that seemed deeply inappropriate given their situation. "I'm just saying, this is not my worst Tuesday." Keth did not understand the reference. He approached the humans carefully, his translator working to parse their strange language. "We need to assess our survival timeline," Keth said. "I have calculated my own. Without temperature regulation, I will die in approximately 40 standard hours. Ambassador Torvax will last perhaps 60 hours before atmospheric exposure destroys his respiratory system. Chief Botanist Yeel has perhaps 30 hours before metabolic failure, assuming we cannot find suitable nutrition." He paused, looking at the 2 humans. "What are your death timelines?" Miriam and Dax exchanged a look. It was a strange look, one that Keth could not read. Then Miriam turned back to him with an expression that might have been pity. "Our death timelines," she repeated slowly. "Yes. How long until your biology fails under these conditions?" "The temperature variance alone exceeds 60 degrees between day and night. The atmosphere contains trace toxins. There are predatory life forms in this region. The emergency beacon is damaged, but it still functions. Rescue will arrive in 15 standard galactic days." Keth paused. "None of us will survive that long." Dax laughed again. It was not a cruel laugh, but it made Keth's scales itch. 15 days? Dax said. "That's it?" "That's it? That is an eternity under these conditions." That's a camping trip," Miriam said quietly. She had finished sorting the supplies, and was now wrapping a piece of cloth around her bleeding head. A bad one, sure. But 15 days? She shrugged. We've done worse. Kath stared at her. You have done worse than this? Humans come from a planet called Earth, Miriam said. She spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child. Our world has deserts that reach 50 degrees during the day and drop below freezing at night. We have mountains so tall that the air becomes too thin to breathe. We have oceans that crush anything that goes too deep. We have storms that flatten cities and earthquakes that swallow towns whole. She smiled, and there was something hard in her eyes. Our planet spent 4 billion years trying to kill us. We're still here. Ambassador Torvax had limped over to join them. His breathing was already labored. You speak of your homeworld as if it were an enemy, he said. It was, Dax replied. Everything on Earth was our enemy. The weather, the animals, the diseases. Even our own bodies tried to kill us half the time. But we didn't die. He spread his arms wide, gesturing at the hostile landscape around them. This is just Tuesday. Kath looked at the humans. He looked at the other survivors, each one counting down to their own biological deadline. And he looked at the broken ship behind them, the only shelter they had on a world that wanted them dead. What do we do? He asked. Miriam finished tying the cloth around her head and stood up straight. Blood was already soaking through the makeshift bandage, but she did not seem to care. First, we survive tonight, she said. Then, we figure out how to survive tomorrow. And we keep doing that until rescue comes, or until this planet runs out of ways to kill us. She looked at Kath with those strange, soft human eyes. 15 days is nothing. Trust me. Kath did not trust her. But for the first time since the Celestin fell from the sky, he felt something other than despair. He felt hoped up by the 4th day. There were only 6 of them left. The Veluxy communications officer had died on night 2, when the temperature dropped faster than anyone expected. Kath had found her in the morning, her body frozen in a curled position, her scales turned pale and brittle. The Kreth engineer had followed her by noon, his lungs finally giving out from the toxic traces in the atmosphere. Chief botanist Yeel had nearly died as well. Her species required protein every 6 hours, and the emergency rations were not compatible with her biology. Miriam had spent an entire night dissecting local plant life, testing samples on herself, first to check for poison, until she found something Yeel could eat. It tasted terrible, Yeel said, but it kept her alive. That was how the humans operated. Kath was learning. They solved problems by throwing themselves at them over and over, until something worked. On the morning of day 4, Miriam gathered the survivors together. She had a map drawn in the dirt with a stick, showing their current position and a point 80 kilometers to the east. The rescue ships can't land here, she explained. The ground is too unstable, and there's too much volcanic activity beneath the surface. They'll need to set down in this valley. She pointed at the eastern marker. We have to walk. 80 kilometers, Ambassador Torvax said slowly. His voice was weak. The atmosphere was slowly destroying him from the inside, and everyone knew it. That is impossible. It's not impossible, Dax said. He was checking the straps on a makeshift pack he had built from wreckage. It's just hard. Hard? Torvax's translator made a sound like bitter laughter. My species cannot travel more than 10 kilometers in a single day under optimal conditions. These conditions are not optimal. I will die before we reach the valley. Then I'll carry you, Dax said. The silence that followed was absolute. Kath stared at the human, certain he had misheard. You will carry me, Torvax repeated. If you can't walk, I'll carry you. Simple. I weigh 60 kilograms in this gravity. Dax shrugged. I've carried heavier. Yeel, the Sithani botanist, stepped forward. She was smaller than the others, with 4 arms and large eyes that caught light in strange ways. "This is not possible," she said. "My people have studied many species. Sustained physical labor causes lactic acid to build in muscle tissue. The pain becomes overwhelming. The muscles fail. You cannot simply carry another being for 80 kilometers." Miriam was checking her own pack, making sure the weight was balanced. "Lactic acid buildup," she said. "Yeah, that happens. Then how can you carry him?" Miriam looked at Eel with a strange expression. It was not pride, exactly. It was something darker and older. "Pain is just information," she said. "Our bodies send us signals telling us to stop, telling us we're damaged, telling us to rest. But those signals are just suggestions. We can choose to ignore them. You can choose to ignore pain." "We can choose to ignore almost anything," Dax said. He had finished with his pack and was now stretching his arms in wide circles. "Fear, exhaustion, hunger, pain. Our ancestors learned how to push past all of it. They had to, or they would have died." Keth thought about this. He thought about the Veluxi, who had evolved on a gentle world with stable temperatures and plentiful food. Pain meant damage. Pain meant stop. His species had never needed to ignore that signal because their world had never demanded it. "What kind of world did you come from?" he asked quietly. Miriam smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "A world that didn't care if we lived or died. So we learned to be stubborn about it." They began walking at dawn. The sun rose hot and angry, and by midday the temperature had climbed past 45 degrees. Keth felt his scales cracking in the heat. He drank water sparingly, knowing their supplies were limited. By the end of the first day, they had covered 18 kilometers. Torvax had collapsed after 12, and Dax had lifted him onto his back without a word. The human's shirt was soaked through with sweat, and his face was red from effort, but he did not stop. "Does it hurt?" the eel asked him as they made camp that night. "Yes," Dax said. He was sitting against a rock, his eyes closed, his breath heavy. "It hurts a lot, but you continue, I continue." "Why?" Dax opened his eyes. In the fading light, they looked almost black. "Because if I stop, he dies. And I decided he's not going to die. So I keep walking." Eel's 4 arms wrapped around herself. It was a gesture of confusion. Keth knew, a sign that she did not understand what she was seeing. "Your body is breaking down," she said. "I can see it. Your muscles are damaged. You are developing a fever from the infection in your wound. By every measurement I know, you should be incapacitated." Dax laughed. It was a tired laugh, nothing like the bright sound he had made on day 1. "My body has been telling me to quit since I was 12 years old. I stopped listening a long time ago." Miriam sat down beside him and handed him a ration bar. "Eat," she said. "You need the calories. I'm not hungry. I don't care. Eat." Dax ate. Keth watched them, these 2 strange creatures who seemed to operate on rules that no other species followed. They pushed when they should rest. They ignored signals that should be absolute. They treated their own bodies like machines that could be forced past any limit. "Humans," Keth said slowly. "What are you?" Miriam looked at him. Her face was sunburned and tired, and the cut on her forehead had reopened during the walk. But her eyes were clear and calm. "We're survivors," she said. "That's all we've ever been. Not the fastest or the strongest. Just the ones too stubborn to know when to quit." She lay down on the hard ground and closed her eyes. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow we walk again." Keth did not sleep well that night. He lay awake, listening to the alien wind and thinking about a species that had learned to ignore pain. A species that carried its allies on its back through hostile terrain. A species that looked at impossible odds and simply refused to accept them. For the first time, He understood why the Galactic Union had been so quick to welcome humans into their ranks. It was not because they were useful. It was because they were terrifying. On the 9th night, the ground split open and tried to kill them all. Keth was dreaming of home when the first tremor hit. He woke to find the earth shaking beneath him, red light bleeding through cracks in the soil. Somewhere nearby, Yeel was screaming, "Move!" Miriam's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone move now. The volcanic fissure opened less than 20 meters from their camp, spilling molten rock across the ground where they had been sleeping moments before. Heat washed over Keth in a wave, and he felt his scales begin to blister. "The eastern ridge," Dax shouted. He was already lifting Torvax, whose legs had given out completely 2 days ago. "We have to cross the vent field." Keth looked where Dax was pointing. Between them and safety lay a stretch of broken ground, dotted with gas vents that spewed superheated steam into the night air. The temperature there would exceed what any of them could survive. "We cannot cross that," Keth said. "The heat alone will kill us." "The lava behind us will kill us faster," Miriam replied. She grabbed Keth by the arm and pulled him forward. "Run now, argue later." They ran. The vent field was worse than Keth had imagined. Steam erupted from the ground without warning, hot enough to cook flesh. The rock beneath their feet was warm, then hot, then burning. Keth felt his footpads cracking, felt pain shooting up his legs with every step. Beside him, Yeel stumbled. One of her forearms had been burned by a steam burst, and she was crying out in a language Keth's translator could not parse. Her biology was failing. Her species was not built for this kind of trauma. "Keep moving," Miriam shouted. She was ahead of them, scouting a path through the vents, her movements quick and precise. "Follow my exact steps." They followed. Behind them, the lava flow advanced, slow but unstoppable. The air grew thick with sulfur and ash. Keth's lungs burned with every breath. And then he saw something he would never forget. Veluxy navigator Thiessen, who had been silent and terrified for most of the journey, slipped on a loose rock and fell toward an open fissure. Keth saw it happen in slow motion, the young navigator sliding, screaming, reaching for anything to hold on to. Miriam moved faster than Keth had ever seen a human move. She threw herself forward, grabbed Fizzon's arm, and pulled. The effort dragged her own arm across the edge of the fissure, and Keth heard her skin sizzle against the superheated rock. She did not let go. With a strength that seemed impossible, Miriam hauled Thiessen back from the edge and pushed him forward toward safety. Only then did she look down at her arm. The burn was severe. Even in the dim red light, Keth could see that the skin was destroyed from wrist to elbow, revealing raw tissue beneath. By any reasonable measure, Miriam should have been screaming. She should have been in shock. She should have been unable to function. Instead, she wrapped the wound in a strip of cloth torn from her shirt and kept moving. "Miriam," Keth said, his voice shaking. "Your arm." "I know," she said. Her voice was tight with pain, but steady. "It can wait. Move." They crossed the vent field in what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When they finally reached the eastern ridge, Keth collapsed onto the cool stone and simply lay there, staring at the sky. The others gathered around him. Dax set Torvax down gently, then sat beside Miriam and began examining her burned arm. His face was grim. "This is bad," he said quietly. "We need to clean this, or infection will set in." "I know," Miriam said again. "Do it." Dax pulled out their remaining medical supplies, precious little, and began cleaning the wound. Miriam did not make a sound, but Keth saw her jaw clench so tight that he thought her teeth might crack. Yeel sat nearby, her injured arm cradled against her chest. She was watching Miriam with her large, light-catching eyes. "Why?" she asked finally. Why did you do that? Thiessen is not your species. He's not your family. Why risk yourself for him? Miriam was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was tired but calm. Because he needed help, she said. Because I could help. Because... She paused, searching for words. My ancestors survived because they worked together. Alone, a human is weak. Easy prey. But together, protecting each other, sharing the burden? Together, we became the most dangerous thing on our planet. You burned yourself, Yil said. You may lose function in that arm. Maybe. Miriam shrugged with her good shoulder. But Thiessen is alive. That's what matters. Keth sat up slowly. His scales were cracked and burned, his body aching in ways he had never experienced. But he was alive, and he understood now that he was alive because of the humans. Your species, he said slowly. You were persistent predators, yes? I have read about this. You would chase animals across great distances until they collapsed from exhaustion. Miriam nodded. That is how you see this, Keth continued. This planet, these trials. You are simply chasing survival across a great distance. And you will not stop until you reach it or until your bodies physically fail. That's one way to put it, Dax said. He had finished wrapping Miriam's arm and was now leaning against a rock, his eyes half closed. Another way is that we're just too stupid to know when to give up. No, Keth said. It is not stupidity. It is something else. He looked at Miriam, at the ruin of her arm, at the exhaustion in her face that she refused to acknowledge. You have decided that death is not acceptable. You have decided that survival is the only option. And you will continue until that becomes true. Miriam smiled. It was a small smile, tired and pained, but genuine. Yeah, she said. That's about right. Keth looked out at the volcanic landscape behind them, still glowing red in the darkness. They had crossed the impossible. They had walked through fire and steam and heat that should have killed them all. And the humans had led the way, burning themselves alive rather than let anyone fall behind. 6 more days, Keth said quietly. 6 more days, Miriam agreed. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the stone. We'll make it. I promise. Keth did not doubt her. He did not know how she could make such a promise, how any creature could look at what they had survived and still claim certainty about the future. But he believed her anyway. That was the thing about humans, he was learning. They made you believe. Day 15 came slowly. Like a gift no one had dared to expect. The rescue shuttle broke through the clouds of KX-447 just after dawn, its engines screaming against the hostile atmosphere. Keth stood in the designated landing zone and watched it descend, hardly believing what he was seeing. They had made it. 4 of them, at least. Thiessen had died on day 12, his body finally giving out from cumulative damage that no amount of human stubbornness could fix. Yil was alive, though barely. Her burned arm had become infected despite Miriam's best efforts, and she had spent the last 3 days in a fever-induced haze, carried between the humans in shifts. Torvax was alive too. The Kreth ambassador had not walked a single step in 9 days. Dax had carried him the entire way, across rocky terrain and through sandstorms and up a mountain pass that should have been impassable. By day 13, Dax could barely speak. By day 14, he was coughing blood. But he did not stop Dodd, and then there were the humans themselves. Keth turned to look at them as the shuttle landed. Miriam stood nearby, her burned arm hanging uselessly at her side. The infection had spread despite treatment, and dark lines were visible beneath her skin, climbing toward her shoulder. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken, her sunburned skin peeling away in sheets. Dax stood beside her, though stood was generous. He was swaying on his feet, held upright by sheer will. His fever had spiked past 40 degrees 2 days ago and had not come down. His muscles were so damaged from overuse that the Veluxy medics would later say he should have been paralyzed. They were dying, both of them in different ways. Their bodies had been pushed so far past the breaking point that recovery was uncertain at best, and they were smiling. "Told you," Miriam said, her voice a dry croak. 15 days, nothing. Keth did not know how to respond. He had watched these two humans drag themselves across an impossible distance, sacrifice their own health for aliens they barely knew, and refuse every logical reason to give up. They had burned, bled, and broken themselves in ways that should have been fatal, and they were smiling about it. The shuttle doors opened, and Galactic Union medics rushed out with equipment and stretchers. They reached Yeel first, loading her carefully onto a medical platform and rushing her toward the shuttle. Then they came for Torvax, who Dax finally, gently, set down on the ground. When the medics reached the humans, they stopped. Keth watched their faces as they scanned Miriam and Dax with their diagnostic tools. He saw confusion first, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like fear. "How are you conscious?" one medic asked Miriam. She was a Veluxy, her scales a pale blue, her eyes wide. "Your vital signs indicate systemic failure. Your body is shutting down." "Yeah," Miriam said. "It does that sometimes. You need immediate treatment." I need to make sure my crew is safe first." Miriam's voice was quiet but firm. "Is everyone loaded?" The medic hesitated. "Yes, but then I'll get treatment now." Miriam took a step toward the shuttle and stumbled. Dax caught her with one arm, and together they limped toward the waiting medical team. Keth followed them. He did not know why, exactly. He simply felt that he needed to be there, to witness whatever happened next. Inside the shuttle, the medics worked frantically. Yeel was stabilized. Her fever began to drop as alien medicines did their work. Torvax was breathing easier already, the shuttle's filtered air soothing his damaged respiratory system, and the humans lay on their medical beds, surrounded by equipment and monitors, being slowly pulled back from the edge of death. Keth sat beside Miriam's bed. She was unconscious now, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had fought for 15 days. Her arm was being treated, the infection being burned away by targeted radiation. New skin already being cultured for grafting. She would live, the medic said. Both humans would live, but the damage was significant. Recovery would take months. Some functions might never fully return. A small price, Keth thought, for the impossible. 3 weeks later, Keth stood before the Galactic Council. The chamber was vast, filled with representatives from 100 species. They had gathered to hear his testimony about the crash of the Celestin and the survival of its crew. Keth had prepared a formal report. He had statistics and analysis and carefully worded conclusions. But when he opened his mouth to speak, something else came out. "Humans," he said, "are not like us." The council waited. "They do not have superior strength," Keth continued. "They are not faster than us. Their senses are not sharper. By most metrics, they are unremarkable among the species of the galaxy." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But they have something else. Something I did not understand until I watched them carry my dying crewmates across 80 kilometers of hostile terrain. Until I watched them burn their own flesh to save strangers. Until I watched them stand upright on day 15, when every law of biology said they should be dead." Keth looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from species who had never known true hardship. "Humans have the ability to decide that reality is wrong," he said. "When their bodies say stop, they continue. When their situation says surrender, they refuse. When death itself approaches, they look it in the eye and say, 'Not today.'" He took a breath. "They do not survive because they are strong. They survive because they are stubborn. Because somewhere in their evolutionary history, they learned that giving up meant dying. And they chose to never give up again. Ever. Under any circumstances. The council was silent. I recommend, Keth said slowly, that humanity's species file be updated. They should be classified as Class 12 on the Endurance Rating Scale, the highest classification available. Class 12 is reserved for species from Category 4 death worlds, one council member said. Worlds where survival itself is considered impossible. Yes, Keth replied. I know. The council exchanged glances. Finally, the speaker, an ancient being from a species Keth did not recognize, leaned forward. Is there anything else you wish to add to your testimony? Keth thought of Miriam, smiling through her pain. He thought of Dax, carrying a stranger on his back for 9 days. He thought of 2 small, fragile creatures standing against a planet that wanted them dead and winning. Yes, he said. If a human ever tells you they will survive something, believe them. Do not question it. Do not doubt it. Simply believe them. He paused. And whatever you do, never give them a reason to turn that stubbornness against you. The council approved the classification update that day. Humanity was officially designated a Class 12 endurance species, the first to receive that rating in over 1,000 years. And somewhere, in a medical facility on the other side of the galaxy, Miriam Cole opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling, and smiled. 15 days. Nothing. She had told them so.